Ukraine does have its own economy. It's battered, but it is functioning.
China is competing directly with Western countries, whereas Western companies can't compete with them.
In Washington, every reaction from China does seem to be seen as an escalation.
If we treat cybersecurity as a purely defensive cost, then we lose.
Cyber criminals, their whole day is spent looking for these single points of failure.
Everyone, it's another episode of The Dip in your ears and in your eyes. I'm Kassandra.
And I'm Daniel, and it is the Q&A edition, which means that we answer your questions and put them to the experts and our global network of correspondents.
We're kicking it off with Ukraine's economy. It was in reply to one of our episodes on Russia.
That's right. So Reckless Abandon Z left a comment, and I think that Z might tell you a little bit about where this commenter's loyalties lie. And they say, does Ukraine even have an economy or just depend on the largesse of other countries? With Braxian replying, Ukraine has no economy. They are totally propped up by foreign money. Funny how DW never mentions that.
It's a little funny to me how sometimes a lot of these hater comments don't seem to actually watch any of our videos or really engage with the content. But honestly, I love an opportunity to myth bust and fact check. So I'm just going to take this one and run with it because we actually put the question to our correspondent in Kyiv, Rebecca Ritters.
Hi from the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, where I can confirm, yes, Ukraine certainly does have its own economy, one that, though imperfect, was already functioning well before Russia invaded in 2022. Global financial organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, they say, yes, okay, the economy here is under immense pressure and strain, but it is alive with a GDP of around 190 billion US dollars in 2024. Now that's still below pre-war levels, but it's around the same level as countries like Hungary or Qatar. Okay, keeping in mind those countries are much smaller, but 190 billion dollars nonetheless. Now, the economy is still going despite the war. You've got farmers who are growing and exporting grain. You've got factories that are still functioning. You've got the tech sector that is still going and growing. And if you've been asleep for the last 4 years, say, and you were parachuted into somewhere like Kyiv or another city across the country, you could be forgiven for at least a short while, not realizing that there was a war on at all. You know, shops are open, cafes are full, people are out and about on their way to work, all helping to keep that economy ticking over. But of course, the war has taken an incredible toll on the economy, and the war is very expensive. Nearly all of Ukraine's domestic revenue goes towards the war effort, making up about 50% of the overall budget. That leaves a huge shortfall that needs to be filled by foreign aid. Most of the foreign aid goes towards Ukraine's civilian government costs like pensions and healthcare. So in short, Ukraine does have its own economy. It's battered, but it is functioning. But for now and for some time to come, it will be dependent on that financial lifeline from its allies as it continues to try to fight this war and keep the economy going at the same time.
Thanks to Rebecca for that answer. And now to China. It's another place that whenever we cover it, we get a ton of comments.
That's right. This one from Manda Santoso says, how come if it's the US who does it first, it's countermeasures, but when China does it in retaliation, it's a provocative act? Should China just stay silent and accept whatever the US does without doing anything?
Well, we put that question to DW's China Analyst, Clifford Coonan.
A lot of this is a question of controlling the narrative when trade talks about how how China likes to present itself as this patient, benign country that is acting very reasonably, whereas the US everything is being portrayed by. We have Trump as a figurehead who's a firebrand, who seems impulsive, who's attacking friend and foe alike with trade tariffs. But actually, what's happening in terms of the tariffs on China are things that probably should have happened over the last 3 decades. There should have been more pressure on China to reform since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, which didn't happen because a lot of people did very well out of China's rise by getting cheap goods made in China and all that entailed. But now that the economic model in China is changing, and China is competing directly with Western countries, it has an unfair advantage that it's built up over decades with industrial policy, with the fact that it can subsidize its industries, whereas Western companies can't compete with them. So if it had been done in a measured way over the 3 decades, and if China had been made to follow world trade standards more closely over that period, you might have a more equal situation. But as it is now, China has built up this incredible economic strength, while still having an economic model that allows it to trade and to export its goods into the West at prices with which Western countries can't compete. And so while Trump's style does annoy people, a lot of people in trade on both sides, on all sides of the spectrum, believe that that he possibly has a point in trying to damp down Chinese growth in particularly on exports. So in that respect, a lot of what you're seeing then is a question of style. You know, that the fact that China plays itself as a wounded party, and Trump portrays this very aggressive figure. And so as to whether China should stay silent and accept what the US is doing without doing anything, it's not going to do that, obviously. But it does like to portray itself as a wounded party. And I think what I'd say to that is that if you look at it quite closely, it's actually much more of a clever negotiating tactic than it is anything else.
Clifford Coonan there. Thank you very much for doing that for us, Clifford, for answering our viewer question. Plenty of food for thought.
That's right. And it's interesting here, right? Because the U.S. has always exported norms as easily as some of these U.S. companies now are exporting movies and TV shows. So they're used to packaging their power in a way that the world can easily recognize and shaping the way actions are perceived before they're even really analyzed, right? But the question here is whether China is communicating with the West or whether it's in fact just communicating with its own people. It's really not really actually about packaging its message in a way that the world can maybe absorb without fear, so to speak. Maybe it just isn't about communicating to the rest of the world at all. Then, of course, in Washington, every reaction from China does seem to be seen as an escalation.
That's right. And sometimes it is an escalation as well. And the fact is that it looks like the US has been playing a kind of good cop, bad cop game recently. We saw Donald Trump supposedly reaching out an olive branch, though some people said it was trolling, basically saying, no, we love China, we want good relations with them. And then Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, saying, you know, China is doing this just to be an aggressor and it just wants to be in control of everything like that. Something that we discussed in detail with Rick last week. And yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where people from the kind of Western perspective assume that they are playing the same kind of linguistic communication strategy as the US is. But I think what you said is important, that actually they could be talking at kind of cross purposes here, while at the same time following this kind of strategy of at one time reconciliation and at another time aggression. And I think that's why we're ending up with this kind of to and fro that you often see playing out in the news media.
Right. And another thing we spoke about last week was cybersecurity, and you all got in touch with us with the following question.
F. Tux, 1915, terrible year. But anyway, we shall continue, says about cyber attacks. The crucial point is critical infrastructure. There has been a huge fuss about this for years, and now we are seeing a single point of failure. How can this be? It's
a great question, and we did put it to an expert, James Andrew Lewis. He's a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And so we wanted to know, why are we seeing single points of failure that lead to attacks having a large impact on businesses and economies?
Critical infrastructure has been a focus for cybersecurity really for decades. And the problem is that the pace of change in network technology and digital technology is too fast for the rules to keep up. There's basic things you can do, like multi-factor authentication, like having cloud redundancy. A lot of companies haven't done that. You have to do those things, though, because you're never going to be able to make a perfect defense. And so think of this as a very complex machine that people didn't always think about security when they built it. And so that's why there's single points of failure. We don't necessarily know what they are, but cyber criminals, their whole day is spent looking for these single points of failure. And unfortunately, there are enough of them that they're always going to find one. So it's just, think of a very complex machine that wasn't built with security in mind, and now we have to fix it.
Yeah, that's a great answer from James there. A fascinating conversation. I think everyone should check out our previous episode if you want to get into depth on cybersecurity with James. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's interesting the way that the cybersecurity industry is mirroring a lot of other industries in the sense that we're seeing a lot of consolidation. What's interesting here, though, is that you have, for example, a few companies that do have the firepower to invest in good protection, and they show their trustworthiness, and then everybody flocks to them, right? And they become the big players. And then each time a cybersecurity company makes a major mistake, their reputation is kind of dragged through the mud. And we talked a little bit with James about this last week. You see other companies gather some of those clients, pick up the people who maybe don't trust company A anymore. But then the risk in the end, when you step back and look at it, it's really concentrated among those few players.
Yeah, this concentration could be quite dangerous. I mean, this is when it comes to this kind of single point of failure that could occur when you just have a few companies who are being entrusted with the cybersecurity of big companies.
Whole industries.
Yeah, and government departments. I mean, like the US Energy Agency and its involvement with the nuclear power plants and those being hacked and all of this. I mean, we have to, if we treat cybersecurity as a purely defensive cost, then we lose. I mean, the leverage lies in redesigning systems so that attacks no longer scale.
Right.
And this comes back to the idea that you could theoretically break into a system once and infect millions of computers. It's getting more difficult to do that just because a lot of these big companies are finding the holes to plug as they come along. They do have the deep pockets to pay bug bounties, for example. That's where you pay a hacker to on purpose hack into a system and then say, we're going to give you $2 million if you tell us about the vulnerabilities that you found.
These kind of like white knight hackers.
Exactly. And so the issue is that when these are still concentrated in those big firms, while they do have the deep pockets to do that, if any of those companies, like let's say Microsoft, gets hacked, then that is a big kind of concentration of the scale and therefore the scope of a potential breach. And so in other words, we need to re-architect digital infrastructure to have the resilience built in, and that's very difficult with these kinds of concentrations that you just mentioned. And what's clear from James's answer is that doing less than what we're doing now, or continuing doing it slowly in terms of building our defenses against cyber attacks, it's just no longer an option.
A lot to digest there, and some of it is admittedly nightmare fuel. But if you have nightmare fuel questions for us, please leave a question or a comment under this video, and we're going to be sure to take a look at it. And of course, if you have an email question, you can email us at thedip@dw.com.
And we'll be back with much more from the world of business and finance and trade and economy on Friday, because we'll be back with another edition of
The Dip.
Bye for now.